that it didn't seem like a childish boast, but the realistic goal he would do everything in his power to make happen. The part about the Kanai and storage scroll said a lot about how he viewed his Biju burden, and spoke well of his continued good spirit and attitude towards others despite having every reason to hate the village that scorned him his whole life. He actually found himself looking forward to training and working with Naruto, hoping to see more of his former friends in his new charge's actions and mannerisms, which were a perfect mix of all four of his deceased friends. He had the look of Minato, the mannerisms and verbal tics of Kushina,
Oh,
the burden
shit.
of Rin and Kushina, and the attitude and openness of Obito. He really was a unique blend of traits and qualities, and Kakashi was actually finding himself excited to bring out the very best in one of his new students, and hoped they could get past their issues and work together. The problem he now faced was really on how to get these three very different young genin to work together, because he already knew that he couldn't fail this team with the last Uchiha on it, and the true legacy of the fourth. The civilian and shinobi councils both were putting pressure on the Hokage to pass Sasuke Uchiha and get him onto the mission rotation as soon as possible. Maybe that is the real reason Naruto was included in Sasuke's team. Both councils would never risk the Uchiha just to continue blocking Uzumaki from advancing as was seemingly the case in the past. Okay, good, replied Kakashi to his young team of genin. Now, tomorrow we will have our first mission, so you better prepare tonight. What kind of mission? Asked Naruto
Still
in excitement.
trying to get into
Survival
that.
exercises, responded the older Junin lazily, with just the four of us. What kind of mission is that? Asked Naruto, thinking they would be doing something awesome. Didn't we do survival exercises at the academy? Added Sakura softly. Oh, these aren't like the academy survival exercises at all, answered Kakashi with a bit of an eye smile that did not seem nearly as friendly as any earlier ones he sent to his genin. Only 33% passing rate, and all the failures get sent back to the academy for another term. What? Shouted both Naruto and Sakura almost simultaneously, while Sasuke also looked on in surprise and a little uncertainty. But we already graduated, continued Sakura. What about the exams we just took to pass the academy? Those were just to weed out the hopeless cases, responded Kakashi with a bit of pleasure leaking through his voice as he crushed the three genin's hopes. The ones that pass that test are just the ones who have the potential to become genin. I'm the one who gets to decide whether the three of you actually pass or fail. Be at training ground 7 by 5 a.m. tomorrow morning with all your gear and weapons. And don't eat breakfast unless you want to throw it up. With that, the Junin Kakashi disappeared with a shunshin in a poof of smoke that left leaves and three angry and or worried potential genin behind. Sakura was terrified of another test, but hoped that her true love would win the day, and that her destiny to be with Sasuke would allow her to pass this test with ease. Sasuke was a bit worried about the test, only because it was another obstacle for him to get past on his bid to reach and surpass Itachi, and hoped his loser teammates didn't get in his way. Naruto was probably the only one of three with an idea of what was actually at stake. Having failed to become a genin now for 3 terms, he knew that he wasn't going back to the academy by any means. If that meant going all out and preparing for anything to ensure he passed, then his new sensei wouldn't know what hit him. He gave them all day and the night to prepare and even the training ground where the test would go down. Naruto decided that it was about time he used his prankster mentality, and really tipped the scales in his favor and decided to head to the mentioned training ground early to get a feel for the terrain and start trapping the shit out of it in preparation. He also thought about what Kakashi did tell them, and realized that he was trying to set them up to fail by recommending they not eat and have any energy for the test, hoping they would handicap themselves from the start. The other part that stuck out to Naruto was the 5 a.m. start time, this being earlier than most ninja teams began their day, as most ninja did individual training in the morning before getting together with their teams. Naruto has been around the village enough at odd times to know that few missions started so early and less time sensitive, and wondered if his sensei was planning to be late as well again tomorrow, as that would fit into the misdirection he seemed to provide for the rest of the instructions. If he was wrong, it shouldn't be a big deal for Naruto, as he has only ever thrown up food when it was completely rotten or spoiled and never from just overeating or overtraining. So, with those thoughts in mind, he started planning out how much time he had left until the test started tomorrow morning, and how many clones he wanted to put on this assignment versus continuing his training. Spawning the well over 800 clones now, he split them in half, and had one half continue the training schedule he had been operating under for the past few days before sending the remaining 400 clones to Training Ground 7 to first scout and then trap the hell out of it while he went back to his physical exercises after upping the training weights to the third setting. Naruto was able to get in almost 4 hours of speed and weight training, and had worked himself back to his normal speed, despite still having the training weights set to the third setting. He thought about reducing the training weights so he could show off his greater speed, but thought it would probably be better to have that ace up his sleeve in case he needed something to tip the scales later, and wanted it to be a surprise the first time he went against Sasuke. Besides, getting his speed back to where it was in the academy with the training weights on, was quite the feat of only 3 days of hardcore clone training, as most took weeks to get past the first setting. Naruto was really starting to see how amazing and powerful his new shadow clone technique really was when he thought back to how far he progressed or grew in just these last 3 days versus the 3 previous terms of academy instruction. He also realized that he was actually helped greatly by the stupid fox sealed in him, as all his sore muscles were constantly being filled with Biju chakra and refreshed and repaired from the overworking. This constant repairing of torn and sore muscles actually made them grow back stronger and denser, and allowed for his body to recover from injuries and ridiculous levels of training much quicker than most, and was a real benefit to the training method he had developed. Realizing that it was nearing dinner time, he decided to spawn another round of 800 plus clones to reinforce both the others he already had training on their own and those trapping Training Ground 7 in preparation for tomorrow's Genin test. With that taken care of, he headed towards the Hokage's tower and the mission desk, where Iruka said he was working this afternoon to take him up on his offer of free Ichiraku ramen. It was as he was nearing the mission desk that he encountered his first glimpse of one of the other passing Genin teams, as Kurenai Yuhi was leading her 3 young Genin outside after seemingly finishing their first mission of their career based on the proud looks of accomplishment they all wore. Hello Naruto-kun," whispered a shy Hinata Hyuga as she saw the young blonde boy she had crushed on for years in the academy, which had both Kiba and Shino come to stops as they watched the usually loud-mouthed Uzumaki approach them, both noticing the more confident and casual way he moved since the end of their academy days not too long ago, and for Kiba, remembering the way the other boy had stood up for himself and put him in his place. "Hi Hinata," greeted Naruto happily to the pale-eyed Hyuga heiress. "Yuhi-san, Shino." "Dog breath," he continued with nods to each of the other members of Team 8, until his greeting to Kiba resulted in said feral boy growling angrily and getting right up into Naruto's face, completely forgetting the thought he just had to show greater restraint in front of this particular young ninja. "Any time." "Dead last," sneered back Kiba threateningly, causing both Hinata and Kurenai to gasp at the tone and insult, but Naruto to simply tilt his head and continued to glare at Kiba until the other boy turned his head away in supplication, as the memory of earlier this morning played on a loop in front of his eyes and realized he didn't want to get shown up again. Kurenai was then very quick to pull Kiba away from Naruto, and get in between the 2 young Genin to diffuse any tension still lingering. Shino and Hinata were both watching wide-eyed, as their third teammate tried picking a fight with a fellow classmate who seemed to have significantly changed very recently, as he wasn't the loud-mouthed hothead he was even last week. Instead, Naruto was the calm one dictating the pace and seemingly unconcerned about Kiba completely, showing a level of confidence that neither Shino or Hinata had ever seen from the usually worst student in their class. Deciding that something serious had really changed with Naruto, they both promised to themselves that they would be looking into this change, and hopefully trying to get Kiba to back off, as the Naruto they see now isn't the same doormat he was just a few days ago. "Sorry Uzumaki-san," placated Kurenai after a moment of staring down her feral Genin and getting him to back off completely and hang his head like a kicked puppy. "We are going to be working on Kiba's temper and attitude a lot over the next few weeks. You might also need help removing the Uchiha pole of arrogance up his ass," mumbled Naruto quietly, but not nearly quiet enough to get past Kurenai or Shino's bugs, causing them to both look at Naruto in shock for taunting Kiba some more and also giving a very telling statement about his own arrogant-ass teammate. "Oh well, see you all around. Bye Yuhi-san. Bye Shino. Bye Hinata. Congratulations on passing." With that, Naruto left the somewhat stunned Team 8 behind as he entered the mission office by himself, ignoring the open-mouthed stare of several others who were nearby and witnessed the recent confrontation. Many of them wondered about the many changes to Naruto, as he wasn't overly loud or obnoxious, but still rather argumentative and a little hot-headed. Team 8 was probably analyzing the encounter the most, as it involved one of their own, and his relationship with what most people assumed was a useless waste of space in Naruto, but who in fact had started to show real promise of late. Naruto was oblivious to the stares and whispers that followed him practically everywhere, primarily just out of habit, but even he could tell that a lot of the looks he was receiving over the last few days were starting to change, especially among the ninja population. Where before he always saw raw hatred and or total disgust in the eyes and faces of both the civilians and shinobi alike, now he was starting to recognize other looks of speculation, or even a few small nods of acknowledgement. He hoped that it signified a change in how the village saw him as a whole, but knew he would have a long way to go until he won the acceptance of the Leaf Village. For now, he was content with his growing skills, newfound maturity and intelligence, and beginning the career he always dreamed of, and would worry about all the other things he couldn't completely control at a later point. He quickly found Iruka-sensei sitting at the same mission desk he often would watch his surrogate grandfather, the Hokage Hiruzen Sarutobi, operate out of during the days when he could get away from the paperwork in his office. Unfortunately, he also noticed that his favorite teacher was in the process of being yelled at by an overweight civilian demanding that somebody complete the D-rank mission he requested of painting his fence. "If the painting is pretty straightforward, and you don't mind me working on it, I bet I can knock it out pretty quickly," interrupted Naruto as he approached the pair, and instantly had the yelling civilian turn towards him with a glare. "You?" questioned the middle-aged man with the small beady brown eyes, as he continued to glare at the young blonde, weighing his hatred of the demon child against his desire to get his fence painted. "If you can get it done before the sun rises tomorrow, I will allow it." "Great, just show my team where you need us," responded Naruto, who quickly formed a cross-hand seal and spawned 10 shadow clones, who were all lined up standing at attention, ready for orders. "Is that alright with you, Iruka-sensei?" "Sure Naruto, and thanks," responded his former academy teacher in somewhat stunned shock at seeing the usually hyperactive and obnoxious boy acting so mature and professional, and also really helping them out by taking that mission today. So, with the 10 Naruto clones following the older civilian man back to his house to paint his fence, the real Naruto turned to the still somewhat stunned Iruka and grinned wide, showing off his teeth. He was inordinately pleased with his last-second idea, and that it helped out Iruka was even better, and now he would even be able to get a D-rank mission under his belt. He had always dreamed of elaborate and dangerous missions involving rescuing princesses or saving towns, but he had seen all the genin around the village always seemingly doing chores for the civilian population and knew that was the reality of a new genin. "So, Iruka-sensei, are you ready for some Ichiraku ramen?" replied Naruto with a definite twinkle of anticipation in his sky-blue eyes, as his mouth started to salivate in preparation. "Hee. Sure Naruto. Just give me a second to fill out this mission log, sign it, and turn it in before I can leave," responded Iruka with an amused grin as he was again shaking his head in shock and exasperation at the antics of his young blonde friend, who really was the #1 most unpredictable ninja, especially when ramen was a possible reward. With the paperwork done, the unusual pair headed to Ichiraku's stand for a well-deserved dinner and chance for the two to catch up and chat about everything that has been happening in the last few days since the Mizuki incident. After sitting down and placing their orders, Naruto quickly launched into everything he had been doing since leaving Iruka-sensei to go to the hospital on the night of Mizuki's defection, including the tons of training he had been getting in. Iruka was beyond impressed when listening to everything his young student had been up to, and couldn't believe how much of a game-changer the shadow clone technique would end up being for the young genin. He promised after dinner to give Naruto some help and pointers on the echolocation jutsu, as well as the sensory enhancement one that he couldn't seem to get exactly right. He also promised to review the camping survival suite of jutsu, to make sure Naruto wasn't missing anything regarding that suite of jutsus, and show him a few others he might like to learn and incorporate into his arsenal. Naruto was easily convinced of Iruka-sensei's greatness and couldn't wait to get started learning new jutsu, or perfecting the ones he was struggling with. So after they finished their meals, they headed to the abandoned training ground near his apartment where he had been doing most of his clone training, and Iruka got his first look at a Naruto clone training session. To say he was shocked to see the organization, and just the numbers of Naruto clones running around training was a complete understatement. But, after looking over all the different areas of training clones, he was beyond convinced that Naruto was both ready for his help, but also that his goal of becoming a Hokage was a lot closer than he thought this morning. For the next hour, Iruka went through all the jutsu Naruto was learning to ensure he was doing everything correct, and also to check his work and verify that he really was ready for the next stage in his training. His survival camping skills were rated as top-notch, with him only needing experience now, and his trap skills continued to impress even Junin-level opponents. His Hanjin replacement were both superb, with his added physical transformation blowing Iruka's mind when Naruto demonstrated it for him, and also told him how he was using that transformation to get his shopping done much easier and cheaper. His shadow clone was at ridiculous levels, and even his basic Bunshin clone was starting to form almost looking as he was supposed to, a real testament to Naruto's continued training in chakra control. That was also a real surprise for the academy teacher, as he watched his 3-day-old genin fight shadow clones among the treetops without a single slip or misstep, really showing how far his chakra control had come. The echolocation jutsu was next, and Naruto demonstrated it for Iruka, who was able to easily see where his student struggled and knew he could help. It was a familiar jutsu for the former Anbu dolphin, who used the echolocation jutsu himself to develop into one of the best non-Inuzuka trackers and sensors in Konoha, and the reason he was recruited into Anbu during his Chunin days. It also tipped Naruto off as to how his former teacher was always able to find him when few others ever could, and he insisted the older man show him everything he could about being a sensor. That led to the sensory enhancement jutsu, which Iruka was able to explain and work on with Naruto until he could successfully pull chakra into his ears, nose, and eyes to increase the sensitivity each organ had, which felt a little confusing and disorienting at first but got easier to understand the more he used it. Iruka was so proud of everything Naruto was capable of already performing, and what he was able to learn on the fly after just a few attempts to show and demonstrate all the parts to it. Likewise, once they finished with everything Naruto already knew about or was at least working on, Iruka decided to show his young student a few others he thought might be helpful. The rope escape technique and the temporary paralysis techniques were E and D rank techniques respectively, and Naruto was able to quickly pick them both up enough to start really practicing them on his own later. He did however draw the line when Naruto asked about learning the body flicker technique or Shunshin, made famous by Susui Uchiha in the Third Great Shinobi War. He promised him that if he was still interested in a few weeks, that Iruka would gladly show him the very helpful technique and that maybe next time they got together they could spar some too. Despite having been in Anbu years earlier, Iruka had not practiced much over the last 5 years of working in the academy, and a lot of his skills had atrophied considerably and he could use the workout after only an hour trying to train with Naruto left him winded and needing a break. When the pair finally said their goodbyes outside of Naruto's apartment, it was nearing 9 p.m., and Naruto was turning in a little early to make sure he got plenty of rest before his genin test with Kakashi tomorrow morning. Before going to sleep, he started dispelling all the clones he had setting up the traps in Training Ground 7, so he knew what to expect and where everything was, leaving several dozen to continue scouting the training ground all night to ensure nobody came in and messed with his preparations. Tomorrow he was taking down a Junin. Bell test. Naruto was woken at 4:30 a.m. by a pair of bored shadow clones lingering around Training Ground 7, who decided to have a small spar and dispelled each other simultaneously while providing the cringe of new memories that woke the young blonde. After groaning in frustration, he simply got up and put on his new clothes, his brain assimilating the 2 sets of memories he just got and his mood slowly improving as his anticipation for today started to leak through. Putting on one of his new sets of clothes, he marveled at how much better quality they were than anything he owned previously. Clearly being overcharged for goods wasn't the only thing the shopkeepers did to keep him miserable. The sturdy heavyweight black pants and overshirt would hold up to quite the beating, and the surprisingly soft mesh undershirt fit his torso comfortably and left him looking very different from what he had in the past in the bright orange jumpsuit. He decided to go with the boot-style shinobi sandals in black, and for his only bit of color, he included 2 dark orange bandolier straps that he crisscrossed over his chest rather tightly that he used to hold several smaller kunai and shuriken pouches on top of the larger ones he had on each thigh. His hope was to someday incorporate a sword and sheath into the bandolier and or even a large storage scroll like the Forbidden One to hold all of his stuff. For now though, he spawned a pair of clones to make him a large breakfast and pick up his apartment from yesterday's mess. After learning at least a dozen different easy recipes for every meal, he was happily making a large omelette with a few vegetables mixed in that were almost completely overpowered by the egg, cheese, and sausage he added as well. He figured that if he was going to force himself to eat vegetables, that he should at least try to hide them in other foods he really liked so as to at least get some in his diet. He wasn't too worried about Kakashi's warning either, as he didn't expect the seemingly lazy shinobi to be on time, giving him plenty of chance to digest, and a lack of food for him would be very detrimental to his chances of success. Strolling into the training ground at exactly 5 a.m., he was easily able to spot his two waiting teammates by the small bridge that crossed the stream running through Training Ground 7's main clearing. Sasuke was leaning against one end of the small wooden footbridge with his hands across his chest in his classic brooding pose, while Sakura was sitting by a nearby tree stump with stars in her eyes as she drooled over her dark-haired teammate in a very stalkerish way that creeped Naruto out, probably almost as much as it bothered Sasuke himself. They both glanced up when they heard him approach, and then did double takes as they saw him in his new outfit, looking very different from his academy days with only the tiniest amount of orange, and a dark orange at that. "What are you wearing, Naruto Baka?" shouted Sakura once she realized that her usually bright orange teammate looked completely different just from wearing black and more normal ninja attire. And not sure why it bothered her. "Stop trying to be cool like Sasuke-kun. HN. Nice clothes, Dobi," greeted Sasuke with a dismissive sniff to his other male teammate while completely ignoring the female one who had been pestering him for the better part of a half an hour, before going back to his brooding. "Thanks Teme," replied Naruto calmly, and almost politely if not for the casual name calling that was pretty standard with the two, as he too decided to simply ignore his female teammate and look around the clearing to get his bearings on where everything he set up was. "I think I am going to go check something out. Be right back." With that, Naruto quickly jumped out of the clearing and into the surrounding trees so he could be out of view of his teammates before spawning 800+ clones. These clones had the express purpose of hiding among the numerous traps, keeping them all up and running or replacing ones that needed, and lending numbers in support of the original when the fighting finally came down. Several of the clones used the henge transformation jutsu to become small woodland creatures or pieces of debris to blend into their surroundings, and a few even turned into logs and pieces of branches for kawarimi material. The creatures set up a rather large network throughout the training ground, that left almost every square inch of the place in the viewing range of at least 3 clones at all times, a necessity if he wanted to have any chance of pulling this off. Grabbing a protein bar in case Kakashi does arrive close to on time, he quickly eats it to restore some of the energy he used for his mass clones and then returns to the clearing with his teammates thinking of anything else that might help. Realizing that Kakashi's words from yesterday were in fact true, and that he didn't in any way plan to incorporate or include his teammates in his plan, he thought about how he could change that. "Look guys," started Naruto, once back in the clearing and facing Sasuke and Sakura to get their attention, "if this is really a survival exercise, Kakashi is most likely going to try to split us up. Knowing we are always more of a threat when together. I say, we team up and hit him hard and fast. It's going to be really hard. He is a Junin after all, but together we stand a much better chance." "I don't need help from losers," responded Sasuke harshly, and with a glare directed at first Naruto, and then Sakura, causing the earlier to scowl and the later to break down and cry hysterically. "Real nice Teme," clapped back Naruto as he saw their third teammate shrink into herself and sob like a baby, knowing that she would be even more useless now than she would have been if Sasuke had simply included her. "At least I offered this time," continued Naruto more to himself, before moving closer to Sakura and the tree stump she was sitting on and awkwardly standing nearby. "Don't worry about the Teme, Sakura. He just doesn't know how to play with others. You are a great ninja." Thanks. Naruto, sniffled Sakura slowly as she tried to get herself back under control, completely missing the shocked face of Naruto, who was surprised not to be yelled at by the object of his academy crush, having very few memories of her or anyone else really saying nice things to him and not really knowing how to respond. "Why, you're welcome," he eventually stuttered out, before deciding to simply sit down and wait for their lazy sensei. wondering how long it would be. It only took about 10 minutes of silence before Naruto was again up on his feet and antsy about moving around doing something productive. But knowing he couldn't leave the training ground left him with few alternatives. Deciding that he had nothing else he could think of to do while sitting around that didn't require too much chakra as he was trying to get his reserves back up after the massive shadow clone spawning. He remembered a scroll on meditating as both a chakra control exercise and a calming recentering. Figuring he had nothing but time to lose, and he was losing that already by waiting on his sensei, Naruto closed his eyes and thought back to the instructions one of his clones read about internalizing your breathing and focus. "Yo," came the lazy greeting from Kakashi after he appeared in a swirl of leaves near the tree stump that Sakura was sitting upon, causing the three genin to react each in different ways. "You're late," shouted Sakura predictably, although to be fair, he was over 3 hours late. "HN," responded Sasuke, though nobody understood what that meant and continued ignoring him or drooling over how cool he is. "I'm awake," came Naruto's exclamation after being abruptly wrenched out of a deep meditative state that he managed to maintain for a very respectable 2 hours before being interrupted. "Sorry, I got lost on the road of life," answered Kakashi easily, and almost disinterestedly, before looking around the clearing and getting a slight feeling of something he couldn't quite put his finger on, causing his glances around to increase and the feeling of anticipation almost to build. "What kind of lame excuse is that?" shouted Sakura in near hysterics, at the same time as Naruto also responded. "Was it a fun road at least?" he asked, seemingly serious, and neither Kakashi or his two teammates could guess if he was joking for a long moment before he continued. "And are you on that road every day?" Yes," responded the one-eyed Junin slowly, wondering if Naruto was his new favorite for indulging his excuses or if Naruto was just discovering if he was always going to be late. "Cool," came the flat reply that left everybody somewhat confused and answered nothing for Kakashi, and for some reason didn't lessen the somewhat lingering feeling of anticipation that seemed to be growing. "So," started Kakashi after several awkward moments of silence, as he looked back and forth at his three genin, "today's test is pretty simple. You have until noon to get one of the bells I have tied to my waist." "But there are only 2 bells," screeched Sakura loudly. "Yes," replied Kakashi with an eye smile, while cringing on the inside at the girl's volume level and seeming to need to have everything spelled out for her. "Only 2 of you will pass, the other will be sent back to the academy for another term. And be tied to a tree over here while the rest of us eat lunch," he finished as he pulled out 3 bento boxes and placed them on the tree stump next to a small clock that had both Sakura and Sasuke's stomachs growling in hunger. Kakashi looked over all 3 potential genin, and was pleased to see the desire and hear the stomach pains of Sakura and Sasuke as they looked at the food with longing, while somewhat disappointed that Naruto wasn't displaying those same needs. In fact, Naruto didn't look upset, tired, hungry, or stressed at all. He seemingly was just waiting for him to start with a quiet confidence that Kakashi found cute for a genin that was going up against a Junin that outclassed him in every way. "Oh well, the kid would learn the hard way once the bell test began," chuckled Kakashi to himself quietly as he gave one more look around the clearing as the feeling of many others watching was still very strong, but he easily dismissed it. What did he need to worry about with a trio of fresh out of the academy genin? "So," began Kakashi slowly with a one-eyed glare directed at Naruto, who met his look with an intense and ready look of his own. "You ignored the rules again and ate breakfast, didn't you?" "You just said not to eat if we didn't want to throw it up," answered Naruto evenly, and maybe with a bit of sarcasm near the end. "I have no intention of throwing up the breakfast I ate over 3 hours ago, sensei." Kakashi's glare intensified at the young blonde's remarks, because he both saw through his suggestion. He tried to word it as an order, and called him out on the order not having any effect when he was 3 hours late, and was well fed to boot. There was just something about the quiet confidence of Naruto that was unsettling to the veteran Junin. His expectations of the village Jinchuriki had been ridiculously shattered after just a day with the outdated and biased information he had been operating under. Now he was faced with what appeared to be a ready shinobi, with none of the arrogant bravado most new genin displayed, and that smile hinted at something he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to discover. "Just remember," started Kakashi, getting the 3 gains' attention, and deciding to ignore the uneasy feeling he got every time he looked at Naruto, "you better come at me with intent to kill if you want any chance at getting a bell." "What?" screeched Sakura again, what if we hurt you? Haha, laughed the silver-haired Junin sensei patronizingly, you're Genin. You're 100 years too late to be able to even touch me, he continued in a goading fashion, let alone hurt me. At the completely dismissive comment, Naruto's eyes narrowed dangerously, hating to be underestimated and not seen as a threat, and with now something serious to prove all bets were off. He instead decided to start gathering and building his chakra for another overcharged mass shadow clone once they were given the go-ahead. Kakashi for his part, seemed to notice his blonde student bearing down on his temper, and mistakenly thought the loud mouth was preparing for an ineffectual verbal blow-up, and likewise wasn't prepared when said blonde lifted his eyes and he saw the normally sky-blue eyes bleeding almost reddish-purple as a slight smell of ozone seemed to be growing. Wanna bet, Kakashi-sensei? Growled a Naruto whose whole body was practically buzzing with anticipation and the excess buildup of chakra as he brought his hands together in his now favorite cross-hand seal and held it there waiting on the silver-haired Junin to start the test as his chakra just continued to build. Stuttered Kakashi for a moment as he looked at his youngest and supposed to be the worst student in the recent graduating class gathering cage-level amounts of chakra, and wondered if maybe his students could in fact hurt him very much. Begin. The moment the word left his lips, the entire training ground exploded in a chakra-fueled cloud of smoke that could be felt throughout Konoha by even the most basic sensor, and to those sensitive to such things, it was like a blinding supernova. Kakashi himself cringing violently, remembering that day 12 years ago when the Kyuubi descended upon his beloved village, and the wave of killing intent laced with chakra was even more overwhelming than this expression of just pure chakra buildup was. Thankfully, the chakra was pure Naruto's and none of the Kyuubi's chakra had bled through, which was good in that the nine-tailed demon wasn't influencing or in control of Naruto, but also shocking that Naruto could produce this much chakra on his own. When the smoke finally cleared, Kakashi's eyes felt like they were playing tricks on him as well over 1,000 shadow clones of Naruto filled every bare space in and around the clearing of Training Ground 7, further than his eye could see, and everyone had a look of determined anticipation. Before he could really even register them all, he was being leapt upon by dozens of the nearest Naruto clones, who instead of just charging blindly, tried working in smaller groups to cover each other's weaknesses and overwhelm the much more experienced Junin, who was given no time to mount any kind of defensive plan. Naruto knew his clones had to keep the pressure on Kakashi and not let him get space to maneuver, and turn this battle back to his favor. Likewise, he had several of the newest clones incorporating his many prank items in order to tangle up and bog the older ninja down with paint, honey, and ninja wire traps in a relentless stream that probably frustrated Kakashi more than hurt him. But the constant pressure was doing several things, the most important being that the real Naruto was learning quickly as his sensei quickly began tearing through his clones with minimalist moves that slowly Naruto was learning and incorporating into his haphazard taijutsu. It also provided the decoy for Naruto to again try and get his teammates to join him in attacking Kakashi together, though after Sasuke took a jealous look at all the Narutos currently fighting their sensei, he scoffed and left the clearing saying he would do it on his own with Sakura following after him like a lost puppy. The final advantage of so many attackers was that Kakashi wasn't in control of the flow of the fight, as he was constantly tearing through the ranks of Naruto's clones. He was unaware that he was also being slightly directed and led to the edge of the clearing where the majority of Naruto's traps and reserve forces were stationed and waiting in ambush. Then Kakashi seemed to have understood what was happening just before he reached the treeline traps, and tried to make a stand in the clearing, and prevent the fight from moving into the trees where he could sense several traps and other things waiting for him. His next few moments were spent spewing out fireballs that did significant damage to Naruto's nearest clone forces, and made the original realize he would need more help to keep up the assault on his sensei. With almost half of the most recent spawning of clones already taken out of the fight in the first 5 minutes, Naruto was down to about 500 clones still engaging Kakashi at the other end of the clearing from where the original was trying to plan out the continued strategy. He ended up making another 2 pairs of clones, this time hanging one into Sakura and the other into Sasuke, where he sent them with another clone of himself to try again and convince them to help. Hoping that seeing the other teammate already helping it would sway the other, and then not telling them that he tricked them once they were working together. With that part done, he quickly ate down a pair of nutrient bars to regain some strength, which along with the returning chakra of his continually being destroyed clones, left him with enough energy for another large round of clones, this time only numbering around 600 to reinforce the others. It was at that point, however, that Kakashi changed up his strategy, and instead of standing still and mowing down all comers as he had been doing, he instead started using the Shunshin to escape the attacking waves and trying to get behind them or lose them completely. This didn't work as well as he would have liked, however, because the moment he arrived anywhere he was attacked by the nearest clone, disguised as animals, branches, and debris, and once they were dispelled the rest of the horde now had a bead on their location to converge and start the process all over again. This game of cat and mouse was better for Naruto's clones as it slowed down their destruction considerably as the attacks were now smaller at first, and over before too many got involved as Kakashi moved on to other locations. It seemed he was both avoiding Naruto's clones, and scouting for the real Naruto and the other two, to test them individually. Him trying to avoid clones to not alert them to where he was, had the added benefit of giving Naruto and his clones more time to learn about their sensei's skills and convince Sasuke to join them. Sakura joined the moment she saw Sasuke was with Naruto, even if she didn't know it was another clone of Naruto hanged to look like her crush. She was in the moment, he asked her. Sasuke was harder to convince, as he didn't see Sakura working with Naruto to be any great asset, and it wasn't until Sasuke witnessed an ambush on a nearby Kakashi, that he felt that he could at least use his teammates as distractions while he showed off his Uchiha superiority and got both bells for himself. With the three of them now working together, Naruto sneakily hid the two hanged clones once they were within visual range of the real ones to not give up his ruse. The two hanged, Sakura, and Sasuke, Naruto clones, were quickly met up with another Naruto clone, and began acting as a decoy team that Naruto had go around to the other side of the training ground making a good bit of noise, to prepare for the next confrontation with Kakashi. It didn't take the clone team long to find Kakashi still attacking Naruto's clones en masse, and allow themselves to be seen before ducking back into the trees towards the main ambush site. Kakashi was just about at his wits' end dealing with all of these shadow clones, and getting increasingly frustrated that he couldn't simply overpower a finishing move and clear out the whole lot of the clones without the risk of killing the real genins among them. He was also very reluctant to have to use his hidden Sharingan eye on a new genin, and instead kept it covered with his slanted Hite Ite as he took out that frustration on the next several batches of clones. A nice Chidori rainstorm would take care of this entire mass of clones in seconds, but would most likely also completely fry and kill the three real genin among them. Instead, he decided to throw out a shuriken rather lower than normal before performing the shuriken cage bunshin and taking out over 24 of the Naruto clones in one throw. By throwing low, he also avoided a possible lethal hit to one of his real genin if they were among the clones in the attack range and allowed him to replicate the move another 10 times, quickly eliminating Naruto clones by the dozens. The disadvantage to this technique though was shown a minute later, when several Naruto clones had seen and studied the move enough to replicate it on their own, and soon the amount of weapons flying back at the Junin were significantly greater than before. He had to abandon his makeshift perch under the growing onslaught, and returned to using the body flicker technique in many Kawarimi exchanges to escape the seemingly never-ending pursuit of his supposedly worst student. Even the woodland creatures and branches on the grounds and in the trees ended up being Naruto clones, after Kakashi witnessed several of each come to life in order to attack him during his many escapes. The next time he paused for a moment coming out of another Shunshin, he changed up his strategy again and spawned his own trio of shadow clones before descending underground and letting his clones continue to eliminate the Naruto clones while he went hunting for some genin. It took almost no time to find them hiding half-assed outside the main clearing so they could see, almost not even trying, and making him somewhat disappointed that they didn't have something better planned after the pretty impressive start. Popping up out of the earth behind them was child's play as the three fresh genin gave no indication they had any idea he was among them, until he went to pull all three and bury in the ground only for them to explode as shadow clones. Shit, he cursed as a veritable wave of shuriken came flying at him, after pausing at the explosion of his supposed genin and being caught flat-footed again. Damn, shouted the nearest Naruto clone who thought they were finally going to get the more skilled Junin, before sending out the memory of Kakashi traveling through the ground to avoid detection. Soon, with the liberal use of the newly learned echolocation jutsu, every Naruto clone was able to follow Kakashi around the training ground with amazing precision. Though that also included the silver-haired man's clones as well, so they were currently tracking 4 separate chakra signatures. Oh, make that 3. Naruto didn't have any of the same restrictions as his sensei, and was aiming to kill every time, and the clones only needed a single hit to dispel, so within minutes of using the echolocation jutsu he had tracked and eliminated all 3 Kakashi shadow clones, until he was just dogging the original. Throughout this now rather long-running battle, Naruto had been trying continually to get his hands on the bells at Kakashi's waist without much luck, though he had come surprisingly close on several occasions. He decided that he needed to step up the pressure on Kakashi, and grabbed a nearby squirrel
I'm
and then
good
hanged
with the
several clones
XPs.
into his teammates and sent them off to be ready for their
But I'll
sensei
write
to
it
appear
down
in a
later,
shunshin,
though.
grabbing more small animals along the way. When Kakashi appeared at the next ambush site following a hanged clone of Sasuke, Naruto had his Sakura
How
clone
you
get on
been,
the ground
Rex?
among the group of other clones with the squirrel bleeding out from the fresh wound. Kakashi's Shuriken Shadow Clone Jutsu predictably tore through the huddled clones, dispersing them in clouds of smoke that obscured the view for a moment and covered the high-pitched scream of pain his Sakura clone made upon the other clones' destructions. That scream had Kakashi instantly stop and pale completely, fearing that he may have accidentally just killed one of the genin he was testing, and terrified the moment the smoke cleared and a heavily bleeding Sakura was lying collapsed on the ground. The older silver-haired ninja froze completely at the scene in front of him, shocked that his overconfidence against his new genin had allowed the current tragedy to take place and wondering if there was any way to save the young girl. "Don't move," called a frantic Kakashi as he rushed to his downed genin in order to provide aid and see if there was anything he could do to help, and was then shocked when he reached the bloody scene and things didn't completely add up. He didn't have any time to consider what was wrong, as the moment he bent over the downed genin, said genin and several others that were hiding nearby accosted him and clung to any part of his body they could. 2 clones even managed to get their hands on the bells before the veteran ninja realized what was happening and lashed out harshly to the unfortunate clones, who suffered quick deaths along with all the other nearby clones. With the dispersal of several clones almost simultaneously, the large cloud of obscuring
Yeah,
smoke
you gotta
actually
get
helped
that
hide the
grind
next
done
wave of clones
before
that arrived to fight for the bells. That fight was
it's
quick
done.
and
This
brutal though,
season's
as
done and over
Kakashi
with,
was no longer underestimating his genin and
because
dealing
they're about
truly
ready
brutal
to
attacks that had
send
the
out
original
another battle
Naruto
pass
wincing in
pretty
memory
soon.
of the many very painful deaths he was experiencing one on top of the other. He was not making any real headway against his sensei, but kept getting close to the bells and forcing Kakashi to continually try and defend against his many theft attempts. It was at this point though that the real genin arrived, with Sasuke throwing out a great fireball that destroyed the dozens of clones that had been engaging Kakashi and keeping him busy. "No teme," shouted Naruto as he saw the fireball heading into a largely concentrated area of Naruto clones and traps that he knew couldn't react quick enough to avoid, unlike their now freed sensei. With his own teammate clearing all of his numbers near and around Kakashi, the 3 original genin were left too exposed in the now empty clearing to do anything other than succumb to the small hits by their sensei that knocked them all out in seconds and bringing the bell test to an abrupt end. Kakashi though wasn't able to get to Naruto though, as his hidden clones all throughout the training ground instantly came to life the moment he was knocked out and engaged the older ninja in mass, while other clones pulled him to safety and woke him up. That wake-up didn't last long though, as Kakashi created another pair of his own clones. He had literally tear through Naruto's remaining ones until there were none remaining and he knocked out the young blonde genin again. "Well, your teamwork is absolute shit," came the clear voice of Kakashi, cutting through the groggy head fog as Naruto slowly seemed to be coming to, and finding himself tied uncomfortably to a tree while his sensei and teammates sat around nearby. "Though, I will say, you really surprised me." "Really?" asked a hopeful Sakura from her spot near the tree stump she was at when this test began. "Not you, Pinky," continued Kakashi with an eye smile directed at Sakura, before sweeping his gaze across Sasuke to rest on Naruto. "You and Emo King here were as pathetic as I expected you to be." He trailed off while searching Naruto's face intently. Naruto on the other hand, well, he just showed me something pretty impressive. "What, Naruto Baka?" shouted Sakura in disbelief. "The Dobi," growled a glaring Sasuke, trying to kill both his sensei and teammate with just his stare, as he curled and flexed his hands into fists repeatedly, seemingly unable to accept that anybody else might deserve praise or have some skill. Yes, answered Kakashi plainly and definitively. He had several very good and unique plans and strategies that he wasn't afraid to try and adapt around. Trapped and scouted the hell out of this training ground, came prepared, and held his own against a severely greater opponent. I'd say he was hands down the best of you all. With those words, Sasuke practically growled into a scream of rage and disbelief that he would ever look up at the Dobi as a greater ninja, and couldn't fathom how the dead last had already surpassed him in seemingly no time at all. Sakura too was in disbelief, but where her dark-haired teammate struggled with his own comparison to Naruto, she knew her strengths lie elsewhere and didn't really think anything Naruto did was any better than everything that Sasuke did. Naruto though was a different story. Never had another ninja complimented him in such a positive way about his own growing ninja skills, and he was almost bursting with pride and determination to keep improving. Take that, Teme. So, did we pass? Asked Naruto after a moment of reveling in his excitement for the received praise, and realizing he hadn't heard about that yet. No, Team 7 did not pass, answered Kakashi slowly, seeing if anybody would pick up on it. Only Team 7? Asked Naruto with a tilted head as he thought over the words of his silver-haired sensei, and found that phrasing unusual. See, continued Kakashi seemingly talking to Sasuke and Sakura, before turning and smiling at Naruto, he noticed it immediately. Naruto passed, screamed an outraged Sakura, finally registering what was being said and inferred by Kakashi's words. He demonstrated enough to show me what he is capable of, and I was very pleased with everything I saw from him. He thought and acted as a true shinobi and teammate, and if it's what he wants, I will sign off on him entering the reserve genin pool until a spot somewhere else opens up, answered Kakashi plainly to the three young ninja who all reacted very differently. What? Screamed Sakura in outrage, complaining about fairness and repeating how much better Sasuke was over Naruto at everything, while said dark-haired boy just seethed quietly on the verge of a blow-up at any moment. If it's what I want? Asked a curious Naruto, cutting off Sakura's incessant chatter and the emo's brooding, and getting a large and somewhat creepy-looking eye smile from Kakashi. Yes, that is an option for you, Kakashi continued, seemingly happily that the young blonde figured out to look underneath the underneath, and not just accept straight away. Or, you could try the belt test again as Team 7 with Pinky and Emo King over here after lunch, but if you failed to get a bell, the deal's off and you are back to the academy too. It didn't take Naruto too long to think his options through. Having known and heard about the reserve genin, he knew it probably wasn't a great fit for him. He wasn't well liked, and chances of being selected by other genin or chunin and junin instructors for anything would constantly be a battle even if his skills were adequate. That was the real problem though. Reserve genin didn't have instructors. Everything they learned had to be done by themselves, and likewise few if any ever make it past the genin program and into the higher ranks of ninja, hence the somewhat mocking term of career genin. I think Team 7 needs another chance at the belt test, sensei, responded Naruto after several long moments of contemplation, and causing both Sasuke and Sakura to sputter in shock that Naruto would choose the team option and likewise give them both another chance to become ninja of the leaf. Good answer, replied Kakashi with that weird eye smile thing he seemingly does often directed at the young blonde. Okay, Sasuke and Sakura. Here are your lunches, eat up, you are going to need your strength. I will be back in 15 minutes to start the bell test. Kakashi-sensei, aren't you going to let me down to eat lunch too? Asked Naruto just before his sensei left, and getting the other two to look up at the interaction, finding the whole thing rather odd and still wondering what exactly was going on as they opened the tasty bento boxes, both beyond hungry. No. You ignored my instructions yesterday and ate this morning. These two haven't eaten anything and need their strength if they are going to help get bells, answered Kakashi flippantly, before turning to Sasuke and Sakura and continuing in a serious tone, don't share your lunch with Naruto. With that, Kakashi gave a sarcastic little wave to the fuming and sputtering Naruto, before he vanished in a swirl of leaves to who knows where and leaving the three young genin alone in the clearing. Naruto was beyond pissed and pretty damn hungry after everything he put himself through this morning, and couldn't believe that after all that, he was still right back in the same position as he was this morning without a team or sensei. He was seriously having second thoughts now on his choice, and thinking he may have just been better off as a reserve genin, since he was pretty exhausted still from chakra drain and didn't think he would be able to convince Sasuke and Sakura to work with him again. "Here Naruto. You can have some of my lunch," came the small voice of Sakura as she shuffled forward a bit and moved to start feeding an absolutely stunned Naruto. "You are going to need your strength too. And you can probably help a lot more than I can," she finished somewhat dejectedly. "You can have some of mine too," came the unexpected reply from Sasuke as he too started forward to feed the final member of their team. "You too Sakura, we are all going to need to be at our best. This guy is no joke." "What is this?" came the loud shout of Kakashi as he appeared in another swirl of leaves just as all three students started eating from the two bento boxes, and causing them all to stiffen in fear at getting caught breaking the rules. Stuttered Sakura in shock and fear, as the three young ninjas all cringed at the anger they saw on their sensei's face, all three expecting to be exploded at any moment. "You all pass," announced Kakashi to the now stunned and shocked faces of the three newest genin of Konoha, who all had no idea just what the hell was happening. "Huh?" questioned Naruto confusedly, trying to follow along with his new sensei's way of thinking. "Team 7 has passed. You proved you can work together. The individual skills will come with practice and hard work, but I am pleased with what I've seen," explained Kakashi calmly as he eyes smiled at his new genin team, and enjoyed their looks of confusion turned to happiness. "We will meet here every morning at 8 a.m. for some training and teamwork drills, and then do a mission or two in the afternoon." "Awesome," cheered Naruto excitedly, before remembering his earlier exchange with his tardy sensei and asking somewhat apprehensively so as not to upset his new sensei,
I'm not
"Are you going to be
getting
spending some
sick.
time on the road of life again tomorrow?" Came the unknowing reply from Kakashi as he thought about how to answer the question while looking back and forth between his new genin while tearing the ropes around Naruto, and not coming up with anything concrete. "See ya tomorrow." With those words, he disappeared in another shunshin, leaving the three new genin of Team 7 alone in Training Ground 7, all with varying levels of smiles, or smirks in Sasuke's case, on their faces. Even Naruto, who was realizing his sensei never answered him, and was probably constantly late while on the road of life, couldn't keep the happy and proud smile off his face at finally being a real ninja of the leaf. Turning to his new teammates, he also realized that they had a lot of training to do, in order to be ready to fight and protect the village or accomplish any of the more difficult missions. "Well," started Naruto to get both of his excited teammates' attention, "do we want to train together? Or spend time getting to know each other better?" "I train alone," came Sasuke's quick and predictable reply. "I am not going out with you Naruto Baka," shouted Sakura after a moment of thinking over what her teammates
Oh,
said, before
Sakura,
turning to
you
Sasuke.
dumbass.
"Do you want to celebrate Sasuke-kun?" "HN," grunted the monosyllabic Uchiha, before turning around and taking off down the street as fast as he could, leaving a dejected Sakura behind that Naruto usually would have tried cheering up or asking out himself if she hadn't just screamed out her refusal to the unasked question, but just couldn't find it in him today to do so. "See ya tomorrow then,"
I
replied a
wonder if I
somewhat
could get
dejected
into
Naruto,
that
who thought
spot
now
that I
that they were
need to get
teammates they
into.
would also become friends, while a distracted Sakura watched the object of her obsession recede in the distance, and ignored the loud blonde completely as she lived in her own world. Naruto's dejection though wouldn't last but a moment once he realized that he was now a real ninja, and that he was one big step closer to becoming Hokage and a respected member of Konoha. Deciding to treat himself to an Ichiraku ramen feast in celebration of his greatest personal accomplishment to date was definitely in order, and led to him running happily through the streets of his beloved village. He ignored the stares and mutters even easier now than before, having been validated by the last few days of accomplishing goals, becoming a real ninja, learning of his burden, and just not caring anymore about the idiots in the village who couldn't tell he wasn't the Kyuubi. With Kakashi reporting to Hokage, Team 7 under Kakashi Hitaki passed, came the flat response of the silver-haired
Oh, that
Junin after appearing
sucks.
inside the Hokage's office to see his fellow Junin instructors still there, and now staring at him in shock with their mouths hanging open in disbelief on their faces. "What? You passed a team?" came the shocked voice of Kurenai Yuhi, Junin leader of Team 8, and relatively new Junin and Genjutsu mistress, who knew and hung out in the same circles as Kakashi, and could hardly believe what she heard. "What can I say, they worked well as a team. and Naruto almost got me several times, and probably would have if it had continued much longer, came the very matter-of-fact response that had the stunned crowd gasping even more at the revelation that the demon child was that good when his academy results spoke of an abject failure in every sense. But he was the dead last? Came the disbelieving voice of a random Junin in the back of the room, that just had Kakashi shrug nonchalantly. He's not the dead last anymore, came the swift reply from Kakashi. You all had to have felt that chakra spike a half an hour ago.
Better run.
He created over 1,000 shadow clones in the blink of an eye. Give him 1 month, and he will be ready to take on any Chunin in Konoha. Oh please, came the sarcastic and disbelieving voice of Ebisu, a Tokubetsu Junin specializing in training elite ninjas. A sentiment that seemed shared by the majority of the room minus only Kakashi and the Hokage himself. How about a bet? Came the goading response of Kakashi to his former classmate and fellow ninja. Naruto fights Katetsu Hagane or Izumo Kamizuki in 1 month from today. If he wins, I'll have a teaching assistant for the Chunin exams. Oh please, came the sarcastic reply from Ebisu. He has no chance against a real Chunin, even if you gave him a year. Okay, then let's sweeten up the pot then, responded Kakashi, already enjoying having new students to talk about and bet on. Say 10,000 yen? You're on Kakashi, came Ebisu's immediate reply, as anime tears began running down his cheeks as he thought about how to spend all that money he was sure to win off Kakashi, and he seemingly checked out into his own little dream world, that had most of the onlookers wondering if something was seriously wrong with the usually very rule-oriented ninja who was mumbling about easy money all the while.
Shit.
Good, replied Kakashi with a meaningful look at the Hokage, before searching out and finding his eternal rival, who he also gave a small look to indicating that he had something he wanted to talk to Konoha's green beast about once the meeting broke up. Back with Naruto, arriving at his favorite ramen stand, and greeting 2 of his most precious people Ayame and Tuchi Ichiraku. He quickly orders himself some of his new, special, miso ramen and recounts his day of becoming a ninja to his captivated audience.
Where did he go?
After a dozen bowls of the food of the gods, he had finally exhausted his tale of bravery and awesomeness, that saw him by the end a genin of the leaf. Promising the father-daughter pair that he would now be able to come by more often once he started earning money from missions, he said his goodbyes before heading back to his apartment to get a few more things he needed before he continued to train. Having replaced all his kunai and shuriken that were lost or destroyed during his recent bell test, he also grabbed the Fuinjutsu starter set he purchased the other day before making his customary clones to start spending his training. With each of the now 1,000 clones having a chakra version of the starter set brushes, ink, and paper, he had them spread out throughout the training ground before getting to the practice of increasing his penmanship until he was capable of creating his own seals. While the clones slowly worked through the many calligraphy-type exercises related to Fuinjutsu, the real Naruto upped his training weights back to the 3rd setting and set about running himself into the ground again. Throughout the next several hours as the afternoon bled into the evening and then the night, Naruto continued with his clone training and his own physical training, only stopping to grab snacks, or to dispel and then spawn more clones. By the time he was ready to drag himself back to his apartment for some well-deserved rest, he had worked for over 7 hours straight on his Fuinjutsu with over 1,000 clones and had some serious memory transfer to deal with. As he finally laid down, he started dispelling them in groups of 10 as at least their memories were all very similar, and by the time he was finished was completely drained mentally now as well as physically and couldn't keep the smile off his face as he fell asleep stronger than he was the day before. Ranks and growth. The next several weeks saw a remarkable improvement in Team 7's most unpredictable member, as he showed up every day ready to work his ass off and did just that. Luckily, Naruto had taken Kakashi's reluctance to ever talk seriously about why he was always late to everything, as permission to do his own thing most of the day. He would usually show up at Training Ground 7 around 10:30 or so, since Kakashi had yet to arrive before 11 AM yet, and was always moving and doing something physical to increase his training. They would practice until lunchtime, usually separate to get a small bite to eat, and then head to the mission desk to pick a D-rank chore for that afternoon, then rinse and repeat. The other really great thing Kakashi did that first week as his sensei, was introduce him to his fellow Junin and self-proclaimed eternal rival, the ninja Might Guy, in order to find and develop a taijutsu style that worked for him. Guy was beyond eccentric with a ridiculous green spandex monstrosity he wore as a ninja outfit, a somewhat childish-looking bowl cut, and a pair of the bushiest eyebrows anybody has ever seen. He also came complete with a mini-clone in the person of Rock Lee, a fellow genin to Naruto who specialized in taijutsu as well, and as a mini-clone of his own sensei, looked equally ridiculous and who was quick to label Naruto his own eternal rival. Regardless of their eccentricities though, the pair really knew their stuff, and within days had Naruto competing against Lee almost constantly, despite being on very different weight training levels. Likewise, he was constantly being pushed in one of his weakest areas, so that over the course of that first week, he had improved to a level that had even Sasuke look at Naruto in a new light at times when they were working on team training. He had also exhausted the starter weight training set, but was fortunate that Guy knew of a better set of training weights he used for himself and Lee, and now Naruto who was quickly trying to catch up. Because of his massive clone training so many things for long periods of time that others just couldn't match, it gave the real Naruto so much time to work on his growing taijutsu as much as possible at the beginning without neglecting other areas of growth. He was truly getting better at an astounding rate, and by the end of the third week, could probably battle Sasuke to a draw more times than not, and still increasing with every day and every clone. His penmanship had quickly advanced to and then passed the required level for Fuinjutsu, which he was just now starting to experiment on and make his own beginning seals. One of the biggest other areas of growth though, was in his chakra control which he had continually spawned clones every day just to continue to work on. It was a never-ending cycle though, as every time he trained and used his chakra, it grew back a little stronger and denser and therefore in need of more fine-tuned control, and then simply rinse and repeat. He had progressed to the water walking exercise, and had it mastered within days and continued use and training in it, had allowed him to reach a milestone he never expected to reach. He created perfect basic illusion buncheons, useless though they were, and brought a proud smile to his whiskered face. On the mission side, he was still bored senseless over all the chores, disguised as D-rank missions they had to do. Especially since Kakashi wouldn't let him spawn clones to do all the work when his whole team was there working on their teamwork. His sensei did however, allow him to take his own D-rank missions with his clones anytime he wanted as they provided a good service to the village, bringing in money to Konoha and himself which was a real help. His Fuinjutsu supplies were starting to really add up, and he was finding himself in need of more money almost constantly to get the things he wanted to experiment with and continued training on. His schedule had kept him so busy, that he didn't even realize that it had been weeks since graduation and the last time he was actually able to talk to either Iruka or the third Hokage, and decided he needed to remedy that soon and pick the two men's brains. Iruka had promised to teach him the body flicker jutsu, and he also wanted to ask the Hokage about any Fuinjutsu teachers he could direct him to as the art of seals was very difficult to trudge through on your own. With that thought in mind, he returned to the mission desk his team left an hour ago, having finished painting Maiko-san's fence, to find the two people he was thinking about still there handing out missions. Hokage-sama bowed Naruto respectfully, getting several raised eyebrows from those nearby not used to seeing the formal side of the blonde, Iruka-sensei. Hi Naruto, greeted Hiruzen Sarutobi happily, as he looked over one of his favorite people, and couldn't help but be impressed at how much the young blonde had grown in such a short amount of time. What can I help you with today?
I should have
Well,
stayed
came
away from
Naruto's somewhat
him.
embarrassed reply as he ducked his head a bit before glancing over to his former Chunin teacher. I was hoping Iruka-sensei would help me with my training tonight. He promised to show me a new jutsu and maybe spar. I did? Questioned Iruka, as he thought back to the last time he met with Naruto, right before his belt test with Kakashi before it suddenly came to him just as Naruto replied exasperatedly. Yes, came Naruto's reply. I'm ready to learn the body flicker jutsu. The Shunshin? Really? Asked a now curious Hokage as he looked between the pair, wondering how far Naruto had come in such a short time as a genin. Datbeo Hokage Jiji, came Naruto's exuberant exclamation, and had the old Hokage smile warmly at the personal moniker only Naruto would ever use to speak with him, and which always made him happy. One step closer to taking that hat from you Jiji. Is that so? Asked an amused Hokage, who could always count on Naruto to lift his spirits, and who also saw some truth to the young genin's claim after having watched him train to levels that would kill most men and barely slowed him down at all. Datbeo, responded a determined Naruto as he locked eyes with the old leader of the village, trying to show him how serious he was about that goal and not wavering a bit. Fair enough, replied Hiruzen seriously, knowing that while usually a prankster of the highest order, this was one thing Naruto didn't joke about anymore, now knowing what it took to be a ninja of Konoha, and eventually to become the Hokage. Iruka, thanks for your help today. But it looks like you have a prior engagement I wouldn't dream of keeping you from. Thanks Gigi, came the honest and heartfelt reply of Naruto, who then turned to the scarred Chunin with a large grin on his face. Ready Iruka-sensei. I guess, came the lazy drawl of the older academy instructor, as he got up and made his way out of the mission office trailing behind a bouncing and excited Naruto, who was already talking about everything else he had been working on since the two last met up. Iruka knew Naruto was not a fan of theory, so only touched on the basics of the Shunshin, how you had to flood your body with chakra and then aim it at your desired target. It was really just chakra-enhanced speed in a very fast and short application that had been refined into a technique over the years, instead of simply building up one speed naturally. After several side-along trips and self-attempts at it, Naruto was able to perform his first Shunshin, directly into a tree. OWW! Exclaimed a bruised Naruto, in both body and ego as he fell to his backside after crashing face first into the large and unmoving tree. Haha, laughed Iruka a little, that's usually what happens to first-timers Naruto. The same thing happened to me too. Really? Asked a curious Naruto, who despite getting to know the older Chunin better in the last year of academy classes and even more since the Mizuki incident, didn't really know much about one of his few friends and wondered what that said about him as a friend to others. Could you tell me about your first Genin team? He continued curiously, figuring he may as well start learning about his precious people sooner, so he could better get to know them, and knowing he owed them his attention as most of their past interactions were always about him and his problems. Sure Naruto, but let's save that discussion for Ichiraku's afterwards, answered the older Chunin, ignoring the happily cheering Naruto as he learned about their next stop and couldn't wait already. Over dinner that night, Iruka explained all about his first Genin team under the Junin Kaina Uchiha and his first teammates, both of whom were no longer with us. Rookie of the Year, Keita Uchiha, his sensei's own son, and Reina Hyuga, a branch member of the Hyuga clan, and also the Kunoichi of the Year. He went on to explain that he too was a prankster and the dead last, and got paired with the top two ninjas in class, and was constantly being ignored and overlooked in favor of his two more well-known and more promising students. The thing that saved him was the small friendship he created with Sarutobi Hiruzen after the death of his parents in the Kyuubi attack, and the little help and hints the older Hokage would slip into his things over time. He also taught him about the will of fire, and how important that was to Konoha, and was one of the main reasons Iruka was an academy instructor now. Anyways, shortly after they started doing more regular C-rank missions, they encountered one that just went wrong. They were given bad mission information, and were ambushed by a team of Iwa nins out near the border of Kusagakure, and would have all died if not for their sensei. The Iwa Junin successfully engaged Kaina from the very beginning of the ambush, as the team of Iwa Chunin quickly ganged up on the less experienced Konoha Genin team, focusing first on eliminating the Uchiha they felt was the biggest threat. Within moments of the fighting starting, his teammate and rival was dead and the only female member of the group tied up, knocked out, and being carried like a sack of potatoes by the largest of the Iwa nins. The two remaining Iwa Chunin continued to taunt and play with Iruka, sensing absolutely no threat, and also with him not part of a clan, was completely expendable, and they were simply playing with their food while slowly wearing him down. But then, Kaina saw his son's severed head and simply lost it, exploding with chakra before his eyes changed into something Iruka would never forget. The tomo of the Sharingan evolved into a pinwheel pattern, then everything changed. A large chakra construct grew out of his sensei, the size of a boss summons, that tore through everything in its path, including the Iwa nins and their Hyuga hostage. Kaina was never the same after they came back to Konoha with the dead bodies of both of Iruka's more powerful teammates, and it definitely changed things for him as well. Kaina committed seppuku shortly after returning to the village, not able to handle the loss of his only son and the destruction of his first and only Genin team. After that, Iruka became a reserve Genin and had to wait a while until a team lost a member to promotion until he was brought on so they could enter the Chunin exams, but broke up afterwards when all three passed and became Chunin of the Leaf, each going into different fields from there. Naruto was a little shocked that his teacher had so much trauma to deal with from such a young age, and also how similar their team assignments were, and even how they were seen within their teams as the dead last. He was also fascinated by the tales of the Sharingan dojutsu of the Uchiha clan, having heard Sasuke mention it enough times to know it was a very big deal, and wanted to know more about it from what Iruka experienced in its history in Konoha. Iruka told him most of that information he sought would not be available to the main population, and the only true history of the Uchiha would be in their clan library, with the Chunin section of the Shinobi library with just a basic primer that told of the known stories related to the founding of Konoha with Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha. By this point it was starting to get relatively late, and Naruto asked Iruka if he had time for the spar he promised him weeks ago, wanting to test himself against a superior opponent, and still much too energized to sleep this early in the evening. The pair ended up heading to the academy training grounds, as they were the nearest and most familiar to them both to get in some training. Once there, they set up quick ground rules as this was a friendly spar, and both went through a quick stretch to loosen up before they were both ready to go. "Are you ready, Iruka-sensei?" asked an excited Naruto, who Iruka was surprised to see enter an unfamiliar taijutsu stance and looked pretty comfortable as he bounced on the balls of his feet as he waited to begin. "Hajime," answered Iruka, as he exploded into motion charging at the younger blonde hoping to throw him off and end the fight relatively quickly, but was surprised when Naruto's grin just grew as he neared him ready to deliver a basic academy knife strike. "Huh. You'll have to do better than that, sensei," laughed Naruto as he redirected the knife strike lazily, and landed a quick two-punch combo just under the extended arm of his former teacher that had him cringe and realize that this wasn't the same Naruto, Dobi, he was used to dealing with, and made him re-evaluate the young blonde even closer. For the next 20 minutes, the two friends traded blows back and forth, both taking turns seemingly leading the fight as they attacked while the other defended until a counter switched up their roles. Iruka couldn't believe it, as he was pushed to his admittedly rusty limits by a genin who had only graduated less than a month ago, and was showing real skill in the area of taijutsu. At the next small pause, the academy instructor created some actual space before he started making hand seals and was soon throwing around a few low-level earth jutsus to hopefully break the taijutsu stalemate and take control of this spar. That, however, was met with his young blonde opponent also deciding to switch to ninjutsu, and made his favorite cross-hand seal before spawning only a dozen clones, and then instantly switching out with the one furthest away from the incoming earth attacks. Iruka quickly realized that fighting Naruto with ninjutsu would be a huge disadvantage to him, as the shadow clones of Naruto were too numerous, or could be if the blonde wanted, and skilled to simply overpower them all without going all out, and maybe even then. So, he quickly abandoned his next ninjutsu attack, and switched it up to genjutsu, something he expected Naruto had not yet overcome and maybe his only chance to win this spar and save face from being defeated by his probably worst ever academy student. "Demonic illusion. Hell viewing technique," spoke Iruka, after a quick set of hand seals, that had his young opponent in front of him come to an instant and complete stop along with all of his nearby clones. Only a single pair of clones managed to avoid the genjutsu initially, but with the remaining clones almost immediately freaking out from the genjutsu they were now under, it wasn't long before clones started dispelling. With them dispelling, their memory of the genjutsu was then transmitted to all the others, so very quickly Naruto felt as if he was hit with 24 horrifying ways to die, all created by his own subconscious viewing of the genjutsu, which only seemed to add merit to the illusion. It definitely made for two confused clones, who after watching the many imaginative ways they could die, both simply dispelled themselves by tackling the original Naruto to the ground in an effort to also see if they could shake the blonde awake in the process. Luckily, the dual tackle, dispelling did in fact shock Naruto out of the genjutsu he had still been stuck under, but unfortunately it did nothing as Iruka had the match well won by this point, as a grumbling Naruto complained about stupid genjutsu. Iruka ran him through the normal ways people dispel genjutsu, and Naruto had no problem upsetting his internal chakra system to dispel the illusion, but still struggled with having the illusion placed. If he was aware of the genjutsu, he could disrupt his chakra easily enough to dispel the illusion, but he most struggled with simply knowing when he was under a genjutsu. Much later that night while brainstorming ideas, he came up with a possible idea he would try to implement the next day in order to better combat the problem he had with genjutsu in general. He would create a shadow clone genjutsu dispelling team, 3 very hardy clones continually cycling through the process of dispelling and respawning clones away from any action. This would have the added benefit of keeping all of his clones and the original with the newest set of memories, and with the continual internal chakra disruption, that would make dispelling genjutsu a continuous thing that he wouldn't even need to worry about anymore. For now though, he thanked Iruka for all his help and for the spar to give him an idea of how far he had come and still has to go, and headed back towards his apartment before his training continued. Despite the time getting to when he usually turns in for the night, Naruto this evening has a bit more energy still to burn when he returns to his apartment and decides he can always send out more clones. With the thought to research other clones and ways to make them stronger or more durable, Naruto spawns close to the now customary 1000 clones and tells them to get to work finding the solution. Over the next few days, Naruto's clone research and later experimentation really started to pay off as he discovered the many different elemental clones available even if they were currently beyond him, and found ways to increase both the chakra capacity and the density of his favorite shadow clones. He also seemingly stumbled upon a shadow clone explosion technique that allowed him to use his shadow clones as kamikaze bombers, which really increased his offensive output and made his opponents standing still and taking on his clones a suicidal prospect. The real gem of the research though, was a blood clone which was very durable and could act as an independent clone spawning station if Naruto took the time required to set them up. The process was relatively difficult, but not impossible by any means, and required a beginner's knowledge of Fuinjutsu, which Naruto had slowly been acquiring over the last 3 weeks since becoming a genin and almost a cage's worth of chakra. He started with his ultra-dense shadow clone, pouring copious amounts of chakra into the clone before moving on to the next step. Using his own blood, he wrote Fuinjutsu seals all over the clone's body in the pattern discovered from the old scroll he found behind the rack of old scrolls in the Chunin section of the Shinobi Library, and watched after activating it, as the seals lit up as the blood was absorbed into the glowing body of his clone until he looked exactly like the original. The whole process took over an hour, and left Naruto on the verge of exhaustion, but after a large meal and a little rest, he was ready to try again for blood clone number 2, knowing how valuable they would become for him. That night, the original Naruto went to bed immediately after creating blood clone number 2 from his exhaustion, but left his 2 new blood clones with instructions to continue spawning more clones until they were out of chakra, then wait a while and do it again. Naruto was awoken several hours later to more noise than he was accustomed to in the morning, as he could see over 24 Naruto clones all throughout his apartment fixing things, cleaning, studying, preparing breakfast, you name it. And there was probably a Naruto clone currently working on it somewhere in the cramped space of his apartment. Taking a moment to process several hundred new memories from the night, which all came from newly spawned clones while he slept, he realized that he was running out of room and really needed to expand his operations to keep up with his clones' demands. With that thought, he sent out word to start developing clones for civilian jobs to start bringing in more money, set teams of clones to clean out the training grounds of scrap metal and weapons for resale, teams for hunting and foraging in the forests around Konoha, and even sent out a search party to scout and look for a large enough space to occupy. He marveled a bit at how much he had grown in just a short month of real clone training, how much further he still had to go as a ninja, and how his clones were going to lead the way to his continued growth and development. He then went to his early morning workout, training with the green beasts for several exhausting hours until the sun was actually up, and he could take a break for a late breakfast until he had to meet his own team. Realizing that he better head towards Training Ground 7 for his team meeting before he too was considered late, he left his blood clones in charge of his apartment and the expansion project. He contemplated other ways of increasing his funds, and promised to remind Kakashi about his deal to let him perform D ranks with his clones separately from the team as long as he was still working with said team as well. He also wondered if his growing Fuinjutsu skills had reached a level where he could start making money selling his sealing scrolls and explosive tags, which would be a huge boost to his financial resources. "Hey guys," came Naruto's greeting after arriving at Training Ground 7 to find both Sasuke and Sakura already waiting in their now customary spots by the little bridge. "HN," grunted Sasuke in his standard non-verbal reply, before going back to brooding as he leaned against the bridge. "Hi Naruto," came Sakura's pleasant response, having considerably warmed up to Naruto now that she knows how strong he is as a ninja, and since he stopped pestering her for dates almost completely and was even trying to help her train, she found him a rather easygoing teammate. "What's our plan today?" "I was going to keep working on chakra control while I wait," answered Naruto easily to the pink-haired girl who he had been trying to help some for the past week. "Want to join in again?" "Sure," came her immediate reply. "Can you show me the tree climbing exercise one more time? I think I've almost got it." "No problem," said Naruto as he led the way towards the tree line, and before even arriving made the familiar seal and brought forth over 1,000 shadow clones that he then sent out to practice before turning to his female teammate and walking her through the steps of the basic chakra control exercise. Sakura had no problems picking up the tree climbing exercise very easily due to her immaculate chakra control, and Naruto then simply had her continue to go up and down the tree as much as she could to continue pushing herself and increasing her chakra reserves. The real Naruto switched out with a clone early into the practice so he too could continue training his body physically as he killed time until Kakashi decided to show up and get the day's team training started. Sakura was pretty exhausted once Kakashi did finally arrive a little after a half an hour, but was still able to go through the team building exercises and formations practice relatively easily before being dismissed for lunch. That afternoon's D-rank mission was the 4th Tora retrieval mission completed by Team 7 in the last 2 weeks, and again left every member with claw and scratch marks and a strong desire to see that cat suffer. Naruto was able to corner his sensei for a brief bit to confirm he had permission to run unfinished D-ranked missions with his clones, and quickly picked up all remaining D-ranked missions not assigned and sent a batch of
I don't
clones
get
off
it.
to
I'm
complete them
shooting
all
where
before
he's
the end of the
shooting
day.
at, and I'm not
He also
getting...
learned from his sensei that there was a small exhibition match in 2 days that Kakashi arranged for Naruto to show off his skills against a real opponent who would really test his improved growth, and didn't mention anything about the side bet he had on it. Naruto didn't think much of it either, other than showing excitement at getting to fight against another strong opponent to test himself and see how far he was coming along. He didn't really care about who it was, probably another genin team to practice, and dismissed it as unimportant compared to his continued training. That night after creating another blood clone, and when he was finally getting ready for bed, the work of his clones brought a large grin to his whiskered face, as he reviewed all the money they made him from missions, the promise of money from his many new civilian jobs, and from all the metal they found and sold. That night, with 3 blood clones continually spawning clones, Naruto again woke up with many hundreds of sets of memories to go through over the night, and couldn't believe how quickly things were starting to happen. His horde of clones had already secured enough funds to make a legitimate offer on the current apartment complex he lived at, which would provide a great starting point to his expanding empire. They also discovered some underground tunnel systems that had a point of entry very nearby his apartment, that he made plans to explore and expand into as a way of moving around the village undetected. Doing a massive clone spawning of his own, he added almost 1,200 clones to those created by the blood clones through the night, and had them push forward with his plans as he headed off to start his training with the green beasts of taijutsu for a few hours until he was supposed to meet his own teammates for their team training. "Hi guys," greeted Naruto as he arrived at Training Ground 7 to again find his teammates in their customary spots. "HN," came the Uchiha's usual grunt. "Hey Naruto," responded Sakura, who got up without even being asked this time, and headed towards the tree line to continue where they left off yesterday in her training. When Kakashi arrived and witnessed Sakura working on building her chakra reserves by working on her tree climbing with Naruto, he was pleasantly surprised that they had already learned that skill, and wondered if they had started on water walking, and why Sasuke wasn't joining them. He soon learned that Naruto offered to show them both the tree climbing exercise a few days ago, but only Sakura took up the offer since Sasuke didn't think Naruto knew anything worth learning. Liking the initiative it showed, Kakashi rewarded Naruto with one new jutsu he would teach him after learning he already was capable of water walking, and felt he deserved something extra. Kakashi then had Sakura and Naruto move towards the small pond in the training ground to practice water walking, while he went and got Sasuke set up on the tree climbing exercise. After a half an hour, Kakashi was watching Sakura struggle to maintain her footing on the water for more than a few seconds at a time and encouraged her to keep at it, as her chakra reserves were growing exponentially. After watching Naruto run through a taijutsu spar against 24 clones on the surface of the water without a single misstep, Kakashi smiled at the younger blonde who looked so much like his own sensei, Minato Namikaze. He really was impressed with how quickly Naruto was progressing, showing an initiative and drive that reminded him of his parents and his own upbringing, and hoped the young blonde didn't burn himself out working so hard. Thinking about what else to show the hyperactive young Jinkarichi, he decided it was probably time to give him the start to elemental chakra, as his clones just gave him such an edge on learning that he could literally take years of training and condense it into one day with the amount of clones he could get working on something. Unless Naruto had something specific he was looking for, he made up his mind to get his hands on some chakra paper for tomorrow, but first was going to run a little experiment with his favorite little blonde genin. "Hey Naruto," called Kakashi once he saw the young man about to start another taijutsu clone battle on top of the water. "Come with me over here. I promised you a technique." "Is it a super cool one?" asked a Naruto that appeared before his sensei in a flash, that almost had Kakashi wonder if he inherited more than just his dad's looks, and had his customary eye smile twinkle happily as he gazed at the excited young Uzumaki. "I'll make you a deal," started Kakashi, getting Naruto's attention instantly with his serious and somewhat uncharacteristic tone. "You follow my instructions and let me run a little clone test with you right now, which will eventually lead to several new avenues of research for you and your clone army, and maybe be the catalyst to make you great one day. Or I give you a generic B-rank bomb jutsu in thanks for helping Sakura start training." I think with how you phrased that choice, I am going to pick the first option and let you run your clone test," replied Naruto after a few moments of careful thought, and realizing that with his newly discovered shadow clone kamikaze bombs, that generic B-rank bomb jutsu wouldn't be too helpful anyway, and was also very curious about what his sensei thought could be that significant to his growth. "Good choice Naruto. See, I knew you weren't Adobe," came the eye-smiling reply from Kakashi, even as he insulted his student and tried to get a rise out of him to see what he would do. "I'm not Adobe," came the grumbled retort from Naruto, who simply glared at his sensei in challenge as he waited for what the silver-haired Jonin had in mind for this experiment, but didn't react any other way. "Good," answered Kakashi with a small nod of approval. "Now tomorrow I am going to bring some chakra paper to help determine your elemental chakra affinity, but before that I was hoping to run a clone experiment to see if we can't determine your elemental affinity through hard work." "I'm not sure I understand, sensei," came the questioning voice of the younger ninja as he tried to recall everything he knew about elemental chakra, which wasn't much. Each of the 5 main elements has an elemental exercise for beginners to start getting a feel for the elemental chakra within them. They usually start with their primary affinity. Mine is lightning. We can determine yours with the chakra paper I will bring tomorrow, but we may also be able to determine your affinity through trial and error," continued the silver-haired Jonin to the now wide-eyed younger ninja who was starting to understand what his sensei was aiming at. "Because of your clones and massive chakra reserves, you can practice these 5 beginner exercises simultaneously and separately, and we can use your progress and growth in any of the elements to get an idea for what may be your affinity, as it will always be easier to work with an element you are in tune with or have an affinity for, and likewise harder to work with its opposing element. So if I had a fire affinity, I would get those exercises quickest and the water ones slowest?" asked Naruto, trying to ensure he understood completely and starting to realize how helpful this could be if he learned about all 5 elemental affinities. "You got it," replied Kakashi with his customary eye smile. "Now let's start with 50 clones, 10 for each element, and we'll go through the exercises." For the next half an hour, Kakashi shows Naruto and his clones all 5 of the beginning elemental leaf exercises several times. Trying to burn the leaf for fire, cut the leaf for wind, crumble the leaf for earth, electrocute the leaf for lightning, and soak the leaf for water. Kakashi demonstrated each one, though he struggled with water, as he was a primary lightning with a fire secondary. Naruto was able to see the results and learn the little tricks that each element seemed to have. Air needed to be grinded down almost like the sharp side of a blade. Water needed to be saturated from surrounding water molecules. Lightning needed that static charge. Fire needed to be rubbed together and fed oxygen. Earth needed to be broken down into dirt. When Kakashi left him to his own training to check on the other 2, Naruto couldn't stop the grin that was forming on his face as he realized how helpful these exercises were towards the next big building block of any ninja's arsenal, elemental attacks. Deciding to speed this step along a bit, he created another 500 clones and split them into 5 even teams to keep everything fair, and had them join their fellows in practicing until they dropped. Naruto himself took a turn trying each of the beginning leaf exercises to see how little progress had been made with each of the elements and realized that this might take some serious time and work. After today's mission, tilling a farmer's field on the east side of the village, the 3 genin separated for their own homes and lives, or more training for the 2 boys of the team. While Sasuke predictably returned to his compound's own private training grounds, Naruto didn't immediately head to dinner or another training ground but looked around to make sure he was alone before disappearing down into the nearest sewer manhole. Once down there, he used his own memories of countless clone explorers to navigate his way throughout the village's sewer system, until he came upon a different set of tunnels that also crisscrossed the entire village and led to many very interesting and strategic points throughout Konoha. Knowing that most of these tunnels were completely abandoned from the lack of any signs of use, Naruto was happily planning out where and how to grow his small but growing empire and utilize these to avoid the general population. Finding a large open cavernous underground room not too far from his apartment complex, he decides to start building it out into a hidden training ground for him to practice away from any prying eyes. Spawning almost 1,400 plus clones now, he set them all to work on cleaning out and organizing the tunnel system and building the new underground training center and the protections he wanted put in place because of where it was. Heading back towards Ichiraku's ramen stand, Naruto was happy to discover another entrance into his secret tunnel system only a couple hundred yards from his favorite place to eat, and knew that route was going to become very popular very quickly. That night, Naruto set about making a 4th blood clone, knowing that they were simply too valuable not to exploit as a resource for gathering more information, money, and skills, and realized that he probably needed to start increasing his organizational efficiency as well. With that in mind, he decided to give each blood clone a specific function within his growing organization, to make sure everything was getting covered and accomplished that he wanted. Blood clone number 1, BC1, was going to be the overseer and run his underground training facility, and be responsible for organizing training areas and keeping up on learning new skills and strengthening those he already knew. Inside this department would also be research and development for new jutsu, and pretty much everything related to training in the ninja life. BC2 was in charge of the civilian side of things, and was responsible for keeping up with the many civilian working clones they had throughout Konoha in order to increase the money coming in, and looking for ways to grow that even further, as he had ideas to maybe start a civilian business, and would also be responsible for all the accounting and business ventures his clones got involved in. BC3 and BC4 were the information gathering clones who doubled as the Genjutsu dispelling team, as their main function was to both keep every clone and the original up to date with information and continue to search out new sources of learning and information gathering. Eventually this would be the center of his spy network once they had exhausted all the libraries and learning available inside Konoha. But for now, they were working on the library infiltration project, and had even sent out a scout team to start investigating his teammate's compound in the hopes he might one day get invited or have to sneak inside the Uchiha library. He was distracted as he readied himself for bed, by the elemental training clones successfully completing the first of the 5 beginner leaf training exercises with wind. He wondered if what Kakashi believed was true, then that meant his primary affinity was wind, and he could honestly say that he was happy to have something relatively unique, especially in Fire Country. Luckily he already had the shadow clones, as wind was the only element without a defined elemental clone that he knew of anyway, and wondered if that was something he should look into. Deciding to bring it up with Kakashi tomorrow, he reviewed the 5 beginner exercises he had been working on, and could tell that he had progressed in most of the others as well and couldn't wait to see the fruits it bore. When Naruto woke up that next morning, still relatively early in order to meet with the green beasts of taijutsu practice, he could instantly tell that today was going to be a great one as he reviewed the thousands of memories he collected throughout the night. Apparently, both the water and earth beginner leaf exercises had also now been completed by his clones, and he had even started to make some progress on the other 2, though neither was close to completion as the other 3 now were. Earth and water were both very balanced with both offensive and defensive capabilities, and he thought they would be a great complement to his primary wind affinity. Now having done the exercise successfully for 3 of the elements, Naruto was easily able to tell the difference between his affinity for each of the three, as both water and earth chakras seemingly fought him a little still, while wind practically leapt out of him eagerly. Emboldened by his success, Naruto gathered his chakra for a larger than normal clone creation, and was rewarded with almost 1,500 clones emerging throughout his apartment complex, that he quickly sent off to join with the BC-1 training. He then left for his own training with the Green Beasts, which he felt was really going well lately, as he and Lee were starting to push each other now that he had seemingly caught up enough to provide the bowl cut boy an actual challenge. His own taijutsu style that was an incorporated mixture of Guy's Goken style with several elements of the Uchiha Interceptor style, and even several elements of Kushina Uzumaki's own familial style she brought to Konoha from Uzushio that seemed to work really well for the young blonde, though he didn't know about that part yet. Hey Naruto, called Guy once said Blonde arrived at Training Ground 9, where the Green Beasts usually practiced and trained, and only saw the older Jonin there waiting with a large scroll across his back. Sorry for the late notice, but my team is taking a C-ranked mission today out of the village and I wanted to give you some things to work on while I was gone. Oh, no worries sensei, responded Naruto, understanding the need for mission priority. What did you have for me to work on? This is the complete set of taijutsu scrolls one created of the Hurricane style, also known as the Hurricane style of Uzushiogakure, began Guy seriously as he watched the young blonde genin for any reaction to the name, knowing he would be dropping some information on the young orphan that would potentially change his life, but felt the young man deserved it for all the hard work he had put in recently. Uzushiogakure? Asked Naruto with a confused face as he tried to remember or place the village hidden by whirling tides, and not coming up with anything, other than assuming it was part of Kirigakure. The village hidden by whirling tides. For Whirlpool, came the response from Guy. A village once allied with Konoha. Its spiral symbol is still part of our crest. They were known as masters of Fuinjutsu and their people well respected for their skills, potent chakra, and longevity of life. Okay, answered Naruto, still somewhat confused about the information he was being given and feeling like he was missing something very important about it. Why are you telling me all of this? Because, the other important detail of Uzushiogakure that is most relevant to you, Naruto, continued Guy seriously, was the ruling clan of the village was the Uzumaki clan. Naruto's whole body instantly froze the moment Guy mentioned the name Uzumaki, and he couldn't move as thousands of thoughts raced through his mind in seconds. He came from a clan, he had a family, a history, a connection. Were there more Uzumakis out there? Why hadn't he heard of Uzushiogakure before now? It was almost overwhelming to the young genin as his thoughts went all over the place trying to understand why he was only learning about this now, and who else knew about and kept this information from him. I created this scroll from my own observations watching this style, as I had the pleasure of an Uzumaki leading my genin team, continued Guy quietly and with concerned eyes as he watched the young orphan try to come to grips with everything he was learning, and seemed to be struggling with it all and knew his next words would be an even bigger shock to the young ninja. I owe your mother more than I can ever repay, Naruto. Know that if you ever need anything of me, you need only ask. And when I get back, if you can show me you are serious about learning the Hurricane style, I'll tell you everything I know about Kushina Uzumaki, the red-hot habanero and the previous Jinkurichi of the Kyuubi. Naruto was beyond stunned at this point, as he was assaulted with thoughts and fears he had dreamed about and wished for longer than any other dream or desire he could ever remember. He was finally going to learn something about his mom, his clan, and his birthright, and he couldn't believe it was finally happening after so long of being alone in Konoha, and knew now why he always felt so connected to the spiral symbol of his village that doubled as the symbol of his clan. He wondered if this meant that others knew about his mother too, and also why he was only now being told about her, and not even by the Hokage who he had asked several times about his parents. Realizing that he was starting to get mad at all the unanswered questions he had, and all the information that was apparently being withheld from him, he quickly tried to calm down and thank Guy who at least was willing to provide some of that information, even if he wished he had been told previously. His mom was a Junin of Konoha and a Jinkurichi to the Kyuubi. She also came from the ruling clan of Uzushiogakure, and he couldn't wait to learn everything he could about her. Thank you Guy-sensei, came Naruto's first words after several long moments of trying to get his composure, despite a few tears seemingly finding their way down his cheeks. As he bowed deeply to the green-clad shinobi he could honestly say had been one of the most helpful and honest he had ever worked under and was proud to consider his teacher and friend. I won't forget your kindness, and would very much like to know more about her whenever you are available. You got it, Naruto, answered Guy with a beaming wide smile that instantly lifted Naruto's spirits and made him realize how much lighter he felt now knowing anything about one of his parents, and had him gladly return the megawatt grin to Guy. When I return from this mission, I'll set aside some training time for us to talk about her. You really do remind me a lot about her. Thanks Guy-sensei, responded Naruto thoughtfully and earnestly. See you in a few days then young Naruto, replied Guy easily. Keep up the practice. And I think you are really going to take to that taijutsu style. Yes sir, came the determined, yet still somewhat emotional voice of Naruto, who just found a connection to his mother that he was eagerly looking forward to learning and incorporating into his own style. With his normal morning routine disrupted by Guys and his team leaving the village for a few days, Naruto decided that there was no time like the present to get started on something that connected him to his mother and his clan, and it was vital he learned it immediately. So he spawned a dozen clones to read over the taijutsu scrolls several times before he started at the beginning, going through all of the various forms and exercises until they came to him easily before moving on to the next. Over the next few hours, Naruto methodically tore through the taijutsu scroll prepared by Guy, committing every movement to memory and increasing the amount of clones steadily until he had over 100 working exclusively on incorporating these new moves into his already hodgepodge form. By the time for him to get a late breakfast, so he could continue with his day as usual, he had already gone through the entire scroll once and couldn't wait to keep practicing the new style that seemed much more natural to Naruto than anything he had used earlier. Having a quick meal, he then rushed to Training Ground 7 to find his teammates waiting for him to start their chakra control practice while they waited for Kakashi to
coming
appear.
out and watching the
Sasuke
stream.
actually asked Naruto for a
Until
hint
next
about tree
time.
climbing, and the blonde easily replied with everything he learned about how much chakra to use and how to fortify your body.